The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents an interview, Get to Know Your Activist with Arden of Eden. Hey everybody, welcome. I hope you're all doing well. I've done this with a number of people that I've worked with over the years, and now that the CDC's guidelines have been restricted and we've both been vaccinated, I was like, this would be a perfect opportunity to get Arden in to talk about stuff. So I hope you're all familiar. I hope most of you are familiar with my work. If you're not familiar with me, I don't know, how'd you find this? Who sent you this link? Anyway, Arden is a friend of mine who's been active with the ACA and the line and other stuff. I figured, you did a debate recently, and we're going to talk about that in a separate video, but it's like, let's do the getting to know you thing. So, hey, welcome.
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
So I guess I'm going to interrupt as little as possible. I kind of just want you to tell, the early back end story. How did you start? What was your life like growing up with regard to religion, skepticism, and things like that?
Yeah, so it's kind of multifaceted. I always say that I kind of grew up in like three separate worlds. So I had my parents separated when I was really, really young. I was like 2 years old or so. My dad wasn't religious by any description. He definitely was like your typical sort of patriarchal masculinity kind of person. So he kind of fulfilled some of those like roles, but he wasn't religious himself. My parents, my mom and my stepdad, we went to, I've talked about this multiple times. It's kind of confusing. I don't always know how to separate out what kind of church it was.
Yeah.
We called it the Church of God, but we practiced much more like a Pentecostal church. Mm-hmm. It was very charismatic. There was speaking in tongues, a lot of music, so I take that as you will.
There's a branch of the Pentecostals that are the Assembly of God, and much in the same way, by the way, feel free to go dig into a lot of this, and I'm going to be doing more videos on it. You've got Baptist, Southern Baptist, Free Will Baptist, Missionary Baptist, and all these others. Then you've got the various versions of Catholicism. Then when you branch out, in yours, you could have been someone who broke off from Assemblies of God or some other Pentecostal thing to have their Church of God. So
yeah,
it may not even be a denomination. It could just be, here's what the church was.
Right. That's why I tend to describe kind of more of like how we practice rather than saying like, I think Church of God is probably a bad description of what we were.
It's better to hit the doctrines. I mean, like, we thought the earth was young and that gay people were just abominations or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, and on that note, my mom and my stepdad themselves were very progressive people. We had other LGBT family members. The church was all about biblical inerrancy, so yeah, the gay people were bad and justifying slavery and all the good stuff that you get in a classic fundamentalist religion. Then I went to a private Christian school as well, from kindergarten to 7th grade. And that church that I went to had a massive hand in this school as well.
Sure.
Which was interesting because like originally when my parents sent me there, in their minds, we grew up in this really small rural Vermont town. There was less people in my hometown than there were at like my college, for example. So they thought they were giving me a good education. They were like sending me to the best school they could in the area. What they didn't realize was that the school was like so fundamentalist that it kind of maybe like crossed, I feel like, certain boundaries in education. We were doing like chapel every single day. Every single morning you got there, we sang for like a solid 45 minutes about how awesome God is. We went through our Bibles. We had Bible class every single day.
Nice.
On Wednesdays, we had like the special chapel where you had to dress a little nicer, and we got like a guest speaker to come, and they canceled like the first like 2 hours of classes for the day so we could all, have a special extra lesson. So like we definitely got there was no room for like leniency. I know I have some friends who maybe went to like certain Catholic schools or things where like they were strict, but like they didn't really control like them when they got home and stuff like that. Whereas like at my school, when we got those little scholastic like books where you could order books from the stuff, they would tell you which ones you weren't allowed to because like these were the bad books. Like I remember The Golden Compass came out, and I don't even know if this is true, but they told us it was written by an atheist. So they were like, oh, you cannot order that book because it was.
I've heard that as well.
Yeah.
I don't know much about the Golden Compass. I didn't even watch the movie, but yeah.
Yeah, so it was super, super intense.
And this was up through 7th grade.
Yes, up through 7th grade. But I think I had sort of an edge in getting out of it in that, well, my dad's kind of a shit person generally. Him not being a part of the church, I think, gave me a little bit of a... I had a reference of, like, there are people who don't believe in God, and, like, at the time, I thought my dad was a decent person, so I was like, when they say he's going to hell, and I'm going to heaven, and I'm gonna be looking down on him, watching him burn in hell, and I'm gonna be, like, happy, because I'm in heaven, and I'm with God, but I'm gonna be able to see him, and he's burning in hell. I remember from an early age, like, that cognitive dissonance was like clashing. I was like, that doesn't really feel like it makes sense to me.
And for clarity, we'll get to this point. You're now estranged from your dad, and
yeah.
But if in fact after you were dead, your dad was burning in hell, I still don't think you would be sitting there going, "Oh my God, I'm so happy over that."
Yeah, no.
It's the most bizarre thing. I've talked about this before. That my mom thinks she's going to heaven. And what I've told her and other people is that, no, you're not. Because whatever that is my mom that ends up in heaven couldn't possibly be happy that I'm in hell. Which means they have to change her some way. They have to wipe her memory or change her personality or change who she is. So now it's some doppelganger facsimile of my mom that's in heaven, not, my actual mom.
Yeah, no, totally. I also remember I was recently on a Neil 604 Atheist Deconversion Stories. I mentioned.
Hi, Neil.
Hey, Neil.
Get down to Austin again.
I remember I had like a fear of angels too all the time growing up. I would pray and I would always specifically ask, like, if you're going to give me a sign or something that you've answered my prayer, whatever you do, please don't send an angel, because that's terrifying to me.
Don't send me an angel.
I mean, the way they're described is always, like, horrific. They're always, like, intervening in some supernatural way that tends to be overt or even sometimes kind of aggressive in a way that I was like, nope, I'm good. If you want to just, like, make the stars twinkle a certain way, that's cool with me. I don't want to...
Did you do a lot, just out of curiosity, because I know that I did that from time to time, and we just heard from a caller on Atheist Experience who was like, God, give me a sign, and he wanted to just open the Bible. Did you do a lot of, hey, let me reach out, can you give me a sign, just don't do this one?
Yeah, I think that was my approach, and I think that was kind of part of why I stopped believing pretty young. Like, I would say, I mean, there's a number of things that I think contributed to me stopping believing, one of which being realizing I think I might be trans, and eventually the church, like the community I had, was completely stopped supporting me. They called my mom a bad mother and kicked us out of our church.
This was just when you first thought you might be trans, and it became an issue then immediately?
It might have been a little bit after, like when like it got around that I was like probably going to transition or whatever. But it was pretty early. But alongside that, I think I remember praying all the time, especially when I started to come into those feelings and being like, can you, like, give me, like, if you're God, you can do anything. I remember praying, like, let me, like, in my sleep, like, live a life where I can be a girl, and then when I wake up, if you give me that, or you give me, like, some sort of, like, understanding, I'll be a good little Christian boy for the rest of my life. And just kind of feeling like I kept asking for these things and asking for some sort of help, like any kind of sign that can like put me on the right path so I can understand things, and feeling like I was just talking to myself. And so I think it was pretty early that I started to be kind of doubtful because of that. And then once the community dropped from me, I think I was kind of like, well, fuck God and fuck the church, man. These people are assholes.
To be clear, though, so you were at this private Christian school up through 7th grade.
Yeah.
At what point did you start to realize you might be trans? Was it after that, or was it? I don't know. What early? How early is too early?
It's it's muddy. So I feel like my first memories of thinking I might be trans were really young, like probably around like 6 or 7. Um, my cousins used to play dress up with me all the time. They would put me in all their favorite clothes and we would strut around for our moms and be like, ooh, look at like this like fashion show that we're doing. And I remember asking one of my cousins at one point, like, hey, maybe next time we do this, we can like get makeup and hair extensions so I can really look like a girl. And she was like, yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Were they older than you? Or?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I was like kind of on the baby end of the family.
You were their doll at first, and there was some trepidation about, hey, did this go too far? It kind of sounds like that reaction.
Yeah, yeah. But I do remember, like, because it was so fundamentalist, like, we got very strict gender rules. I got reprimanded for having nail polish one time on, like, our Christmas festival. I had, like, red and green nails. I got in trouble for that. Around, like, second grade, I had been growing my hair out because I really wanted to have long hair. I got reprimanded for that, had to cut my hair. So I think, even though I think I had feelings from a young age, I think I learned very quickly that, like, regardless of what my feelings are, I'm supposed to do this.
Oh my gosh. So have you seen the Book of Mormon?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So my favorite moment in there is they're talking about, no, it's not okay to have these feelings. You have to suppress them. Find the buck that's gay and crush it is the thing in the middle of it. And I'm like, yes, we do that to people all the time. And we think, I never told my child that it was wrong. You didn't have to. Kids are good at picking up. You picked up on the hesitation of your cousin that was dressing you up when you're 6, and you start to pick up on, hey, if I grow my hair out, it's starting to be weird. Now for you, and I don't know. I'm the just generic ignorant asking questions. As you started to learn and push back on some boundaries to figure out what's acceptable and what's not, did you go through, like, I know people who loved to do cosplay because it was an escape that was acceptable. And I know people who love to, dress up goth and go, oh, it's not feminine nail polish, it's, it's the dark gothy nail polish. And they go down that road because it allows you to escape from the prison you think you are quite.
Yeah, I think there was probably a little bit of that. Probably. So when I first came out as trans to my mom, I was, I think, 14. So it was like a year after I had left private schools. So it only took a year out of being away from constant messaging for me to be like, fuck, something's wrong. Mom, help me. So after I had told her that, I had told my dad and it was not going great. So it wasn't really about my parents or me, but when I was in public school, still being a boy, but knowing I was going to transition, I kind of went through a phase like that where I was straightening my hair in like the swoopy thing every day, and like I think I'd painted my nails a few times. So there was a little bit of experimentation, but by the time I was like even able to do that, it was already like the feelings were so strong that I had already talked about it. And my mom is amazing. She's probably my favorite human. Even though she didn't necessarily know all the right things to say or what to do, her first response was, well, let's get you into therapy, because even if I don't know what to do, this therapist is probably going to know what to do. And fortunately, I got a good therapist, and I got put on like a good path. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, yay, mom.
Yeah.
Boo, dad.
Shout out to my mom. My mom's super awesome.
I love hearing that. There's people who talk about coming out atheist, and actually, Greta Christina wrote some book on a book on coming out, when and how to do it, and everything else, and interviewed a bunch of people about coming out as atheists. And then there were people that were in the LGBTQ community who were like, "Why would you use the language of coming out? It seems like you're co-opting this thing here." And I pointed out Jen Peoples, who former co-host on AXP, former president of the Atheist Community of Austin, talked about how when she came out as a lesbian, everybody was like, duh. And it was no big deal. And when she came out as an atheist, it was a bigger deal. And so everybody's situation's different. So, I mean, I'm so grateful that you, unlike some people, had at least one parent that was willing to, okay, I don't know what to do. Let's get some experts.
Yeah. And, I think it took me a lot. So, like, I stopped believing in God really young, but it took me a much longer time to be like, I think I'm an atheist.
Right.
I went through a whole stage of, the woo-woo stuff. I was into spirit science. I convinced myself I could do out-of-body meditations and stuff when I was a teenager. think I think realizing that I was trans and that I was already so different from the world around me and the people that I had been exposed to, I think it was easy to latch on to something like that. That kind of gave me an easier break from Christianity, but it wasn't as like dramatic as going from fundamentalist Christian to atheist for me. But yeah, and then I know we've talked about this personally before, but then I had some really bad experiences in high school. When you're growing up in a rural conservative town that's very fundamentalist, pretty much everyone there is religious. Even the churches that aren't as fundamentalist, there was only one other one, was still pretty conservative. I got bullied super badly. I got death threats almost daily for like a year. I got like threats of like sexual harassment of people being like, I want to fuck you, but you're a dude. And I'll be like,
That says a lot more about them than it does about you.
Sure.
Just even in that statement. I mean, normally we talk about when people are tossing around their insults that, well, that says more about you than it does. But this is literally all about them.
Yeah.
I want to fuck you. Okay, congrats, you don't get to.
Right. I mean, like, if that happened to me now, I feel like I'm a much stronger person. I'd be able to laugh that off. But at the time, I was like 15 years old. So, like, I was not like sexually active at the time. And I was like absolutely terrified. And rather than being like, bringing that up to like an administrator or my parents, I kind of figured the best thing to do was to like ignore it, which realizing in hindsight was not the route to go. I wish I had brought it up to someone, but I didn't. And so it just kind of got exacerbated, and the harassment eventually, I never actually got into any physical altercations, but there were definitely some times where there was posturing and like threatening kind of stuff that people did. And it kind of came to an apex when I was dating this one person, and she had expressed that me being trans was hard for her. Like, oh wow, I feel so bad for you. I do get it.
I mean, to be fair, if you're being harassed for being trans, then she dating you is probably going to be harassed for dating someone who's trans. But it's not like it's equally hard on everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. I think at the time, since I had kind of lost my relationship with my dad, I was bullied by like everyone in my school. I lost my whole community aside from like my mom. When I thought of losing this person who I was like genuinely super so in love with as a teen, in that way that, when you're a teenager, like it's intense. So my response to that was, just kidding, I'm not actually a girl. I will reverse everything. It wasn't necessarily for her. I don't like to give that implication. There was so much going into it. But that was definitely the like turning point where I was like, being trans has been so hard. If it's just going to be this life that's like so miserable and lonely and full of harassment, I was like, I would rather stuff it all down and try my hardest to be a normal person and at least have like love and relationships and acceptance in the community than be authentically myself and have this be my reality. Yeah. And that kind of worked for a small amount of time. I went to school. I went to college anyway. I left my hometown. I moved somewhere where there was no one else because I thought I was like, well, at least I can get a fresh start and kind of wipe my hands clean of my trans past, because there was no way I could hide that in my hometown. It was so small. But in a new town, I could almost kind of be normal, and it worked at first. It was, nice to...
Were you still dating the same person at that time?
We did date for another like year and a half, I think, after. Oh, wow. And she respected my choice not to tell anyone. I think she had her own thoughts and feelings about it, but she was like pretty we actually dated for almost 3 years. But after she and I broke up, I tried joining a fraternity because I think at this point in hindsight, what I recognize myself as doing is I had like no actual sense of self. My sense of self as a boy was completely determined by what other people thought of me.
Right.
How other people perceived me. So I was trying to find any group or thing that could like make me feel not so foreign in my own body. But unsurprisingly, because for those of you who don't know, being trans is not something you can choose, and it's not something you can make go away no matter how badly you want it to. Me forcing myself to do that eventually resulted in me going like inpatient in like a psychiatric hospital for a couple weeks. Over the next year, I was in an outpatient program like 3 or 4 times. It was like 4 times in total, but I don't think it was all in 1 year. It was like a year and a half or so. And finally, by the last visit, I had kind of figured out there was also an abusive relationship that was in there too, but sparing all like every nitty gritty detail. I kind of figured out the issue that I was having was that no matter how much I hated it, I was trans and I hated it. So I realized my only path forward was to figure out how to make myself not hate myself.
Right.
That was my path forward.
And we kind of skipped over it, not to draw anybody else in. I'm trying.
Yeah.
Are you an only child, or do you have siblings, and how did they deal with this?
Sure. So my sibling so both my parents are remarried. My stepdad has 2 of his own kids, but we grew up in different households, so they're more of like we don't feel like siblings to each other. I think they would probably say the same thing. I grew up in the same household as my older sibling, who is also actually non-binary.
Oh, wow.
So we're both trans, go figure. They were always super cool with it though. They also identified as as bisexual, but they mostly dated women. So we were both super queer. For them, when I finally was ready to come out for the second time, they were right there by my side. They were super accepting, super helpful.
So basically, you're in this position where you've got your mom. You haven't really mentioned how your stepdad took it, and we don't have to go into detail, but your mom was supportive. You've got a sibling, and they were supportive. Mm-hmm. And so throughout high school, it was you've got a girlfriend who you love and care about, and in the way that we all did when we were 15, 16, 17.
Right.
I'm going through, I'm watching season 3 of Stranger Things. So watching all of the awkward teenager relationships in there.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like going, oh God, I'm glad I don't have to relive this again. And so you start to transition, then you're like, no, wait, we're not going to. And then eventually, you just say, okay, this is who I am. I need to find a way to not be miserable about it and not hate it myself.
Yeah.
How did that, and granted, we're going to get to, how you got involved with activism and skepticism, atheism, and mostly trans activism, but
sure.
I'm trusting that you don't hate yourself now, because everybody's like, Arden's fucking awesome. What was the process like of just coming to terms with it?
So there was a number of steps. The first thing I did personally was I like reading. I really love memoir. I've talked about this a lot of times. My first response was I wanted to read as many memoirs written by women as possible, because I really wanted to expand my concept of what it means to be a woman. What is the experience of women? What are the hardships that women have overcome? Because I think on a certain level, I was afraid of always being like a freak, always feeling like I was like a clown, a man in a dress sort of stereotype. So I really wanted to know what women went through on a broader level, so I could feel does this really apply to me? And actually, that was, I think, one of the biggest steps, because I think at that, and I read a lot of memoirs by trans women as well. I think I realized in doing that women across the board, cis women and trans women, are always given these extremely unrealistic expectations that no human can ever achieve all of them. Like, you're always going to be letting someone down with how you're performing your womanhood. And when I kind of came to that understanding, I think it was easy for me to say, okay, at least transition, whether or not I like am a woman, is kind of besides the point. Transition is the right thing for me, I think, because I think I'm probably never going to live up to society's expectations of women or my expectations of being a woman. But at the very least, I think having society read me as a woman is more important to me than like whatever the logical, like what it is to be a woman actually means. That then is kind of an experience and exposure therapy, in my opinion. That's what it feels like. I remember countless times driving to the grocery store and sitting in my car in the parking lot for like 45 minutes to an hour, just trying to work up the nerve to go inside. Because I felt like I looked like a freak, and like people were gonna look at me and think things. And to be honest, I'm sure on some level they did. But at a certain point, I think after like doing enough therapy, I was in therapy for years at this point, by the way. From being inpatient to this point, I had a single therapist. Shout out to Eileen also. She was huge, so helpful. Eventually, I think I realized people could look at me and they might think I'm a freak. And maybe I even am a freak. But at the end of the day, freaks still need to go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter. So I went in. I was able to at least get to the stage where I could go into the grocery store, right? And then there became the experience of noticing people looking at me and thinking, oh gosh, people are staring at me, like being consumed with like, what do they think? Do they think look like a whatever? And it was kind of the same process where like I had already kind of worked through the same, like a similar fear once before, and just kind of try to reapply that over and over again. Maybe they do think I look like a man in a dress, but at the end of the day, I don't really care because, well, I mean, I do care, but at the end of the day, I can't let that stop me from doing the things that I have to do, because I'm a person in society and I have to do the same things everyone else does, regardless of what they think of me.
That process, by the way, and I've never sat in the car for 45 minutes at the grocery store worried about what somebody thinks of me. I have had body image issues at various times, either, my weight or whatever else it was at different times. Never massive issues, but I have friends who have had body image issues. People who are like, who I don't, they're not even like in one of the scary categories of like morbid obesity, but because they're not happy with how they look, they would sit out there and say, I don't want to go in because I can't wear the same type of clothes as everybody else. So everything I wear is going to be baggy, and I'm going to end up on people of Walmart, if I have to ride in my little cart and things. And some of this is holdovers from kind of like our childish behavior of we're going to make fun of the people, Mm-hmm. Granted, I was bullied on really rare occasions at school, but I went to a school with 900 and some odd kids in my graduating class. I was on student council and a soccer team. I wasn't particularly popular, but I wasn't I was bland apart from, and of course, a number of times it's about the sexuality. Oh, you're gay, Gay was like the worst thing you could be. And when I got in the Navy, there's ribbing and joking going on and hazing that's all about sexuality. And what I'd like to make sure people take away from this is that what you would go through sitting there as a trans woman in the parking lot at the grocery store has nothing to do with sexuality or who you're attracted to, which, by the way, is a secret thing that lives in your head until you're actually, out doing something in public. Nobody has any access to this. This is about how other people perceive you, and that's that's the cornerstone of, you have one idea, or probably more than one idea, of who you are and what you appear to be in your head. And it's like, what's that person think? What's that person think? How nice was it when some random dude actually hit on you? Because that's going to be annoying for a lot of people, but in your situation, it might feel different.
Yeah, I mean, I would even go so far as to say that, like, not even just hitting on me. I worked at a group home for a number of years. I remember the first time one of my clients, he like would try to get under my skin. He would tell other people, like, you know that she's a man or something like that. But then he would also call me a cunt and a bitch. And I was like, huh, it's weird because you're throwing slurs at me, but it's almost kind of validating in a way, because I know that if you saw me as a man, you wouldn't be calling me a cunt or a bitch. You'd be calling me like a dick or an asshole or something else like that. Like, there are small things that trans people pay attention to these things. Like, you, as a survival mechanism, you are deeply aware of how people use language and things like that. But like, most people don't think about it actively. They just say things. So yeah, there are definitely those small moments where I was like, oh, I think I'm finally starting to get to the point where even if I don't feel like I exactly match what my conception of myself is, like I'm not living up to my own standard, at the very least, people are reading me even on an unconscious level as a woman. So that was a massive step in the right direction for me.
I wonder, so you go from, and obviously we could spend hours on your life story and the life stories of people who've had similar lived experiences, but you went from being inpatient, outpatient, suffering from, body image issues, anxiety, couldn't go into the grocery store, to now you are an on fire, take no shit, here's the way it is activist with multiple shows, and not just related to trans issues, but on political issues and skepticism and atheism. How did you get to the point where you're like, not only am I fucking happy with who I am, but it's time for me to set some people straight, and it's time for me to do what I can to help, others that are doing this?
I think it's a continual growth of that first seed of like, I also deserve to go into the grocery store. So whether or not I'm a freak doesn't matter. Maybe I am one. I still kind of have that mindset today. I feel like maybe I am a man in a dress. Maybe I am a freak. If maybe you could demonstrate to me that that's the case. At the end of the day, I don't fucking care, because I've had so much more inner peace. Like I'm able to go into the grocery store without anxiety now, because I know when I go into the grocery store and I check out, the woman scanning my stuff says, "Is that everything you need, ma'am?" Like those small things show me that, all right, regardless of what someone on the internet or someone in a live chat says about me actually being a man or how deep my voice is, I know that people who I interact with on a day-to-day basis read me as a woman. And that's literally all I needed to have like inner peace with, like, the way I've described it before is, it's like, this might be an obscure reference, so if it's a miss, I'm gonna totally dodge. Have you seen Ghost Whisperer? I might have used this on you before.
I don't think so.
Okay.
But go for it. Somebody's seen it?
Sure. So for those of you who have seen
Unless
Ghost
you're
Whisperer,
just making this shit up.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
There's I think it's in season 3. Spoilers, by the way.
Was this the Jennifer Love Hewitt show?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
I never watched it, but I'm at least familiar with it, yeah.
So in the show, around season 3, again, spoilers, the main character, Jennifer Love Hewitt, her husband dies. She can see ghosts, so he stays around as a ghost. And she comes across this accident where she sees a body die. And the second the body, like, leaves, or the spirit thing leaves the body, her husband enters the body. And when he wakes up, her husband's ghost enters the body. And when the other person wakes up, he has this weird experience where he's like, he has the brain of the other person. So most of his experiences and his habits are the other person. But every now and then he has these like flashes of the spirit. I feel like how I've described this is, I felt like for a long time, like, like the ghost of whoever had my body originally died when I was like in utero, and I like took over the body. So like my whole life there's been this weird thing where like most of my experiences and my tics were like originally from like the person who had it before. Finally, at a certain point, I feel like there was like a breakthrough with this, like being able to like love myself and respect my right to go somewhere regardless of how people perceive me, where I was like, now I am the one in control.
Yeah.
Sort of.
No matter what was before, this is now. I'm here, I'm queer, get used to it type thing.
Yeah. But like back to like how I got to kind of being like a take no shit person. I think, like I was saying, it really is just a fostering of that sense of like, yeah, at the end of the day, you know, maybe you can go home and be like, wow, I thought she totally looked like a man. I can't believe people call her a she. That's fine. You can go home and think that. I don't care. I know who I am, and I know how people in society see me. And that's all I'm looking for. And that's all most trans people are looking for.
Yeah.
Are you going to find some niche people online who also want to control how you think and perceive you when you're at home? Sure. I think there are some people who are probably have like, I don't want to project why they're like that, I guess, necessarily. But yeah, that stuff does exist. But I think most people, as long as you in like day-to-day actions, just respect them, make them feel like a human. Don't make them feel like they're a burden on you for trying to just go to the fucking grocery store or trying to live their life, trying to have a job. Then like how you think about them in your mind really doesn't matter. Maybe some people will disagree with me on that, but I tend to be sort of like pragmatic about it. Like I care more about the outcomes of your actions rather than like what your internal monologue is. Like your internal monologue is useless to me. How you made me feel is what actually like matters.
It's the external monologue. No, I'm concerned about internal monologues only because they represent who people actually are, and I would like for people to learn to be better and do better. But
sure,
it's the external monologue. Like we're going to do. Stay tuned for part 2, but we're going to do a part 2 where we talk about the debate that you did recently.
Yeah.
And I watched in the chat. Maybe we'll talk about this in the other. The same type of people who follow me around and troll me wherever I'm doing a debate. Similarly, that's happening to you. And I was like, I looked at the chat and I was like, oh, I hope she's not looking at the chat right now because it's a terrible distraction. I shouldn't look at it when I'm doing debates and that stuff. But so now you go from being miserable to getting more comfortable. You've got a number of different models in your head about how it is, and it's not that I've said the same thing, like, I don't care what people think of me. That's not true, and that's not what I mean. I do care what people think of me. Everybody, well, almost everybody, because that determines how you're treated and how you interact with the world. So, but what I mean is the people who hate me for who I am, fine. If you hate me for something I'm not, if you hate me because of a rumor you heard or something you heard from somebody else, I want to correct. I desperately would love to correct that. Mm-hmm. But if you hate me because I'm a godless heathen who says your God's a piece of shit and that Black Lives Matter and trans rights are human rights, and if those are the reasons you hate me, then I'm A-okay with you hating me because that's who I truly am.
Yeah. Actually, Katie, if you've watched Transatlantic, Katie has a great analogy that she's used that I love this because I've used a similar one, but I think Katie's is more poignant. So like you have brown eyes. If someone walked up to you on the street and was like, you have blue eyes, you'd be like, no, but okay. That's what I feel when people call me a man. They're like, you're a man. And I'm like, no, but okay. If that's what you think, I guess. That's fine.
Now I've interacted with and have several trans friends, and all of them are going to have a slightly different perspective. You know, what Arden says isn't necessarily what Katie's going to say, and it's not what anybody else is going to say. But I'm genuinely optimistic about the world when we've still got a long way to go, and the suicide rate for trans folks is still incredibly high. We have to do a better job of treating all that, and I think that's. Without putting words in your mouth, you got comfortable with you've got your analogies, and then you start doing activism where it's like, let me get out there on social media. And it was, you first came to my attention when somebody said, hey, you need to watch Secular Sexuality. They're going to have Arden of Eden on. And I was like, who? What? And they're like, no, you should watch. She's awesome. And I was like, all right. And I watched. And I was like, oh, yeah. So I started following on Twitter. And then I noticed, you're active. And I don't mean just like active in the activist sense. You're posting things on Twitter. You're calling stuff out. And then I met Katie through Jimmy Snow. And how did the two of you, was it just through that?
So actually, I believe Katie was on Secular Sexuality like the week after I was.
Oh, wow.
Like the week after I was the first time, or maybe the second time, I'm not entirely sure. But I remember to prep for her episode, she watched mine because it was the most recent one. And then I had like already reached out to her at some point beforehand. But like we didn't really know each other at that point. So I think she maybe responded.
There's a whole ocean between you two.
Yeah, she didn't really say much, but after seeing that, she started a conversation, and then we've just been friends since. We've connected well, and we have similar perspectives on trans issues. She's even moved me, I think, to a more progressive end of trans issues. I think for a certain period of time, the difficulty of my transition made me what's known in the community as a transmed or a true scum, which we don't need to get into what exactly that means. Basically, I think from my personal perspective, I would describe it as I was projecting, like, I'm trans because I've gone through hard stuff. And therefore, if you haven't gone through hard stuff like me, you must not actually be trans.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
You're not on my level, sort of.
Yeah.
And, like, it did not take much to crumble that because it wasn't built on anything logical. I don't even remember exactly how Katie did it, but just through conversation, I think she's moved me on a lot of those issues to where...
Wait a minute. Am I understanding this correctly? A leftist trans member of the woke mafia managed to change their position on something and it wasn't all that difficult?
I know.
News film at 11. I just love pointing that out because somebody came up to me the other day and they were like, hey, what's the most recent thing you've been, wrong about and corrected your opinion on? And I talked about something that had happened on the show. And then like a minute later, I was gaming. I was playing Binding of Isaac. And I said something about Isaac that was just wrong. And somebody in the chat corrected me. And I was like, no, I'm pretty sure I'm right. Let me go look it up and everything. It turns out I'm just fucking wrong. And I was like, well, there's another thing I'm wrong about right now. It happened. It's trivial. But if you actually show evidence and you bring good arguments, everybody that I know in the atheist movement, including, I think, and we'll probably talk about this maybe later. I think if you and I could sit down with Richard Dawkins, we could change the way he talks about trans people.
I think so too. I think if he's truly a skeptic, which I think he is based on his body of work, I feel like I could give him some convincing arguments. I mean, to be fair, I feel like I don't expect him to read through his entire Twitter, and we'll get more to this later, but like, I suspect he hasn't really looked through or responded to most of the criticism to his points.
I believe that he may not know that I called him out, and if he does know, it's not because he's probably saw the tweet on his own, it's probably because somebody else pointed it out, because we've shared a stage. And the one thing, we'll talk about it another time because I want to finish up the activism stuff. Mm-hmm. You and Katie are now working with Jimmy's network, The Line, which I'm also on. And on Saturdays, in addition to the other shows that you guys do independently, you do one together called the Transatlantic Callin Show. And the thing that caught me on this, I'm so excited. By the way, if you're watching this and you're sitting there wanting to misgender the person next to me, you need to call into the Transatlantic Call-In Show.
Please do.
Because those two are eager to have ignorant, bigoted, hateful people call in and actually have the conversation and be corrected. How did you guys decide, not only are we going to do this, but we want it to be this? We want to face the people that most trans people are trying to avoid.
So there's a sort of trope in the trans community that to be trans, you have to be an expert in like 15 different fields of study.
Right.
And endocrinology, psychology, sociology, law, like all these different dimensions.
Because you're going to spend every minute of your life defending your existence on all those subjects.
Right. And sort of like, to kind of do a roundabout answer, you know, growing up too with the fundamentalism, my dad is a narcissistic gaslighter, so I became a person who was very obsessed with wanting to know how to be right. How do I know that I'm right? Because I am told that I'm wrong even when I'm like 99% sure that I'm right. So that was something that was passionate for me, and I think that's part of the reason why Katie and I clicked. And at a certain point, after a lot of conversations with each other, Katie had the idea to do a call-in show where we basically ripped off AXP, and we're like, we kind of felt like there was a gap in the market of trans content where, like, kind of, I think we talked about this earlier today, even, you know, the goal sometimes with these shows isn't necessarily to convert the person on the call or even necessarily to convert a viewer, sort of to convert a viewer, but it's more about these ideas are bad, demonstrably, when you compare them to the evidence, but they're also commonly held. So I would like people to call in with these views to so blow them out of the water with how embarrassingly wrong they are, that hopefully at least a person or two at home will be like, wow, I never want to be humiliated on the level that person just got embarrassed on the evidence, so I'm going to never talk about this idea again, and hope that.
or maybe I'll look into this and change the way. I should come up, if I agree with this person's position and they just got swatted around like a cockroach in front of a cat, I need to come up with better arguments for this position. Yes. Because if they go out looking for better arguments for a bad position, maybe they'll realize there aren't any, right, and they change that position. Exactly. That's what happened to me on a number of things.
And I also, I've said this before, I know Katie's on the same page. We both genuinely are skeptics. If someone just calls in and they can show to us that there is like demonstrably more harm to be caused by giving minors access to healthcare, I would probably change my position. I will say that there's a huge body of evidence in support of it, so right, it would take a pretty massive, substantial load of evidence.
A caller would have to be pointing to like peer-reviewed science from medical experts, not just a caller's anecdotal thing. Yeah.
Right. Yes. But again, if someone can demonstrate to like a sufficient degree that they have enough evidence to overturn the academic consensus held by like international medical organizations, then I'll stop. I'll make a public apology and I'll say, hey everyone, I've been advocating for this. Turns out this actually is not good for kids. I'm sorry. As of right now, that isn't the case. So I want people who make claims like giving trans kids access to healthcare is child abuse. I want those people to feel embarrassed that they hold that idea, because they should feel embarrassed. I've said this before, and I am totally comfortable saying this. I think that sort of claim, especially considering the political conditions of trans access to healthcare, is equivalent on maybe a slightly lesser degree to being anti-vax during a global pandemic. It's based on a few debunked studies, and it's like asking to take away healthcare from kids in a time where access to healthcare is already dire. Yeah. It's terrible, and these are views that people shouldn't hold.
There's also so one of my favorite books to recommend, and I'll recommend it all the time, is Innumeracy by John Allen Paulos, that talks about how bad we are with math and statistics and how they can be used to lie and everything else. I think one of my favorite moments on Transatlantic Callin show was from, I believe it's the most recent episode, where you were more animated than in some other episodes, because somebody came in talking a bunch of bullshit, and you had actual statistics, and you were like, blah, 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 boom, blah, 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 boom, blah, 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 boom, 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 and it was just number. And then the caller was like, well, I don't trust doctors.
Yeah.
And my head metaphorically exploded, and so did yours. And you were like, I'm fucking done with this guy. Because if you came in worried about what the science says, and then Arden tells you what the science says, and then you say, I don't trust doctors, why did you put me through all that? There's some other baggage there. And if you take away, like if you and I start a conversation and we say, hey, we're going to go with whatever the science is. You think one thing, I think another. We're going to go find the science. We're going to look at it. We're going to come to an agreement on what it says, and then one of us is changing our position. I know you and I do that. Me and Katie would do that. Kristen and I would do that. Boom. Let's sort it out. And then if we did that and we got to the end, and you proved you were right, and I just said, well, I don't believe any of that science.
Yeah.
Oh no, you didn't. I mean.
I especially because it's like, here's the thing. I got emotional on my own Twitch stream the other night talking. We were kind of going into this a little bit more about the fact that, like, the thing is, when you're trans, it's hard to research a lot of this stuff because there are issues with ethics. You know, you can't do like a double-blind placebo sort of trial with trans issues.
Yeah, you can't take a bunch of kids and drop them off on an island and let them fend for themselves and see what happens.
Right. I mean, and then... oh God, where was I going with that point?
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
It reminded me of the children corn example.
It's just that the
if you remove the acceptance of science, you started a conversation thinking we're both willing to follow the science. This person just doesn't know it.
Yeah, right. That's kind of where I was coming from with that guy, and I find it interesting. I've only done a cursory view of the abstract in the methodology and the conclusions. There was another study that came out only about a month ago that said almost the exact same thing as what I had said, and also had another massive sample size. Pretty sure it was a meta-analysis, so there might be some overlap.
Right.
But I could be wrong. I definitely need to do more research into it. But again, I mean, I'm citing like multiple studies that have like when we're talking about like the regret rate of transition and things like that.
Is it true? Somebody said this in chat, and I think you would probably know. Is it true that there are more people who regret hip replacement than...
by a lot. The hip replacement rate of regret is like... I saw someone in chat say this. Someone in chat says it's upward of 30%. I don't know if I can say that.
No, let's not give any numbers, but we did both see the study.
Yeah. It's far higher than the rate of people who regret seeking medical care for transition. And like, what's funny is this person messaged me on Twitter later, and they were saying like, oh, well, you may think 2% is great, but I care about that 2%. And I'm like, Here's where you're wrong. I also care about those 2%. I think there's not enough that is available to those 2% who regret. There's not enough resources for them. But that does not mean that suddenly we legislate so kids don't have access to healthcare. That's absurd. If we made it so that every time there was a regret rate above 2%, that we restricted access to healthcare for everyone,
we'd have nothing.
We'd have nothing.
Yeah.
It's absurd.
It's not that 2% is statistically insignificant. By the way,
no.
2% is the current death rate of all closed cases worldwide and in the United States with regard to COVID-19. For all the cases that have been closed, the death rate is right around 2%. None of us are saying that's trivial.
No, not at all.
What the pandemic guidelines and everything else have been about is about making sure that 2% begins to decline, and that we're not, risking a bunch of other people. But there's a fundamental difference between a pandemic and essentially regretting voluntary surgery or even a medically necessary surgery like a hip replacement. So a lot of the people who are like, oh, I care about the 2%. And I saw somebody cite COVID's 2%. You want me to wear a mask over that 2%. Why don't you want to stop all children from getting that? I'm like, first of all, I don't know what fantasy land you live in, but it's not like there's a mass of 5-year-olds who are suddenly being given puberty blockers. That's not the first step. None of that happens. Every time I don't want to exaggerate too much, many of the times when fundamentalist conservative people have something that they're opposed to, they tend to exaggerate. And so it's like, oh, we have to stop abortion because they're just literally ripping apart kids at the 8-month point, and that's not true. I mean, but if they take away, and this may be a better question for part 2 when we're talking about the debating stuff. What's your take on, hey, I entered into a conversation with someone, I thought we were going to rely on scientific evidence, and then when I proved my point, they suddenly want to dismiss the very criteria that I thought we'd agreed on. Do we need to start every discussion or debate saying, will you commit to changing your mind based on evidence? Because it's irritating.
I feel like that should be... here's the thing, is I think even if people don't agree to that explicitly, I think we all agree to that implicitly. Like, we're all doing these calculations in our head when we start these conversations. So I don't really feel like that is necessary. But at the same time, it would be nice to be able to have that point so that when it devolves to where you almost kind of expect it to devolve to, and that's another thing, is I've been in these conversations so many times, I know where they go most of the time. From the second that caller called, I knew where he was leading us. I've been down that road too many times. I know. It would be nice to be able to point back to you and say, you are breaking the agreement that we had at the beginning of the conversation. I guess I just kind of assume that people are going to respect evidence, but maybe that's naive.
Arden and I are very similar and have very similar notions on a lot of this. For me, I agree with you. This is an implicit thing. If you don't run around the world thinking we're all implicitly agreeing that we will make decisions based on the best information and evidence, it doesn't mean everybody identifies as a skeptic, doesn't mean we're always going to get it right. But that is the implicit agreement, that if I come to you with good information, you should be willing to accept it.
Right.
And the advantage that I have and that you also have, and you mentioned this when we talked about we're not necessarily trying to change the mind of the caller, is this. If I have a caller who breaks that implicit agreement, I have confidence that the audience I'm trying to reach is smart enough to see that without me saying so.
Yeah.
But if I say so, now I'm confident everybody's going to get it, that the person I was talking to is not arguing honestly.
Right. And I think that's, one of the big things that Katie and I want to do is we want people to be able to, even viewers who maybe already support trans rights but don't necessarily know how to defend it, because like we said earlier, it intersects with countless different fields and professions. I would like people to be able to walk away with, oh wait, I've heard the counter argument to this before. Even if they don't remember it perfectly, they know where to go to find it. I think those kind of things are really strong. But like at the end of the day, one big reason that I think I get into this activism is reflecting on my life and the harassment and abuse and shit that I've gone through to learn how to say, like, maybe I am worth something to myself. I don't want trans kids to, like, I'm not saying there's no value to suffering. I think there is some value to going through hard things. But I don't think
There's also value to seeing someone else suffer so that you don't have to.
Exactly. So like a big part of this for me is wanting to get more and more people onto these sides of argumentation that Katie and I have been advocating for a long time, to hopefully eventually make the lives of young trans people easier and easier. Because especially for people who are assigned male at birth, trans women, when you go through male puberty, there are things that change that you can never undo. Ever, ever, ever. Puberty permanently changes certain things. At least as of right now, we don't have android bodies to implant you into yet. Yeah. There are conspiracy theorists who are going to grief me for that, because there are anti-trans people who claim that we're trying to... Anyway.
If they come up with the right android body, I think I'm in.
Yeah, right. That's what I've always said. But, whatever.
But so that's probably a good place to stick a pin in this.
Yeah.
Tune in for the second part of this, where we're going to go over your recent debate, which has to do with Dawkins' tweet. But for clarity, where can everybody find you? And I'll include some links as well.
Sure. So you definitely should check out the Transatlantic Call-in show on The Line. That's Saturdays at 5 p.m. Central Time. I'm also on Twitch, and I'm hesitant to give you links to the other stuff I'm doing because it's not all live yet, but I do some other naughty adult content across the interwebs that if you follow me on Twitter, you'll get links eventually.
Yeah. But the important thing is that you guys got to meet someone who I'm fortunate enough to know and count amongst my friends. And like we've done for many other people here at the Atheist Debates Project, there's somebody out there who's going to be like, hang on, what the hell did this have to do with atheism and debate? If you're still asking that your question, I must have failed. Because quite frankly, all of the subjects about who somebody is and how religion played a part in their life and how it didn't, where it was and wasn't important, is critical, because you're going to run across people in conversations that are carrying around religious baggage that are going to impact how they view trans people, how they view cis people, how they view gay people, how they view pan people, how they view non-binary people. Oh my God, there's 73 genders and blah, blah, blah. This is not just isolated to some Twitterverse left-wing, right-wing discussion. This is happening all the time amongst religious people. It is frustrating to me that we also have to fight these battles amongst secular people as well. Mm-hmm. And so keep watching. You'll see Arden on ACA Productions. You'll see Arden on the Line stuff. You'll be able to find her on Twitter and all of our other stuff. But come back, because we're going to talk about the debate that she did just the other day, which I think James tried to claim that it was the shortest debate in modern day debates history. And I'm not sure whether or not that's true. But we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.